my last vlog, I talked about the difference between theme-based units and project-based units. Afterward, I started thinking more about authenticity and how that affects the development of a project-based experience. The first thing I thought about was a lot of times people confuse the first P. They say problem-based learning. Well, in project-based learning, there can be a problem, there can be an issue, there also can be a topic that's being explored. I think what's critical is that when we get into the authenticity of a project-based learning environment, we have to begin to ask ourselves, is it truly authentic? John Larmer, back in 2012, wrote a blog post that I really found interesting. He said, if you think about authenticity on a sliding scale from no authenticity at all to somewhat authentic to fully authentic, it helps us in our design. And so I wanted to share with you, first of all, from what he wrote. He wrote, not authentic means the work students do does not resemble the kind of work done in the world outside of school, or it's not intended to have an effect on anything apart from an academic purpose. He goes on to say, beyond the teacher and maybe classmates, there's no public audience for students' work. Maybe no one actually will use what they have created. Or possibly the work they do is not what people do in the real world. With that, he goes on to talk about somewhat authentic. And as I shared earlier, sometimes theme-based learning can have a feeling already of a project. And so I thought a great example of that would be, as I shared with you in my last post, I wrote lots of theme-based learning units back in the 1980s. And one of my friends, Mary Ellen Sterling, now Mary Ellen Taylor, wrote one as well for upper grades called U.S. Constitution. And in it, just as I did, she went ahead and made sure that she had informational texts and literature kind of combined with all the other areas of math and science and social studies. And she also was thoughtful about thinking what would be some good culminating activities or projects, no pun intended, to her unit. And so one of them that I feel fits in that somewhat authentic category was she had them do the constitutional times, where the students had to work collaboratively, which is another piece of project-based learning, where they had to form a staff and they had to have a news department, an editorial department, features, entertainment, and so on. They also had to have a business department because they had to raise the revenues that they needed to have their newspaper. And they also needed a layout department and an art department and a proofing department. And they were going to, of course, need to publish this. Where I think it begins to not move toward fully is, while they were doing a simulation, it was extremely valuable in the creativity and the collaboration and the communication and so on. With that piece, where was the authentic audience that was really going to be looking at that and be able to give them feedback and allow the students to really reflect? So again, I think it's great that we're having these students do some things even at that somewhat authentic level. I think ultimately the goal of all of us involved in project-based learning is to definitely reach a fully authentic unit throughout the year, throughout the years, where the students are doing something that they feel is extremely meaningful for themselves, for their school, for their community, for the world. An example of that might be if a school has an area outside that is not being used, and so maybe a group of teachers even come up with the idea of having the students explore what it means to really create a sustainable garden, and maybe even looking at using some of those garden, if you will, products for the cafeteria, or for maybe a backpack project where students are getting some supplementary food over the weekends. So the piece with that that's so critical, and the reason that is more of a project-based learning environment, is developing the garden is the project. It's not a culminating project, it is the project. And it's very important that we find an authentic audience that can give students feedback, not even necessarily at the end, but also during the project. What does it mean to be sustainable? What do gardeners think about? What do we have to consider about soils, etc.? And so having some of those authentic audiences even through the unit is extremely important for our students to give them time to reflect before they actually do present to a public audience and get feedback. So as you continue on, we just want more than anything to make sure that our students are having meaningful experiences in their school life that they can carry on through into their adult life as well.